Welcome everyone to our 12th Starting the Conversation series. As most of you know, our Starting the Conversation series is about societal issues in an open forum, and we discuss things that matter to employees both inside and outside of the workplace. Some previous topics have included caregiving support, the opioid crisis, and today we'll be discussing stress as far as prevention and management. So if that's what you're here for, you're in the right place. Today, we will focus on prevention and management together, and then at the end, of course, we'll have some time for questions from our audience. It is starting the conversation for a reason. We do hope that you have some questions. If you're online and not in person today, you can submit those questions to hrnews@gapac.com. Again, that is hrnews@gapac.com. So according to the CDC, stress is defined as the result of pressures or tensions and how our body responds. Of course, the body includes both physical and mental, so we'll be talking about the effects of stress on both. So to get started, I will introduce our panelists, and to my left, today we have Dr. Jamie Blandino, a licensed clinical psychologist and co-founder of the Thrive Center for Psychological Health in Decatur, Georgia. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from Georgia State University and has been in private practice since 2006. Jamie is also a mom of 2 teenagers, enjoys yoga and acting. Next up, we have Michelle Nogan. She is our HR director here at GP. She's also a yoga practitioner, wife, and mom of 4. She's practiced yoga for over 15 years, and for the past 2 years has been meditating daily to manage her day-to-day stress. I wonder what happened over the past 2 years to make you meditate daily.
That's a good question.
And then we also have Curtis Williams, our well-being program coordinator for Koch Business Solutions. Curtis supports our award-winning well-being program and HR strategy team in the areas of physical, mental, and financial well-being, resources, and partnerships. Curtis is an Atlanta native and resides in Smyrna with his wife Tracy and their 2-year-old daughter. I'm Joy Light, communications manager here at Georgia Pacific. I guess I don't need the card for that. And also a mom, and I'll be moderating our panel today. Dr. Blandino, we can start with you.
Okay.
Could you share some of the most common stressors that you typically see amongst your patients and the effects of those type of stressors on the mind?
Absolutely. First, thank you for having me. I am already just so impressed with your company, taking time to have these conversations that are incredibly important, mental health being probably the most important, but I guess I'm probably biased. So I feel like it's important to actually make a distinction between stressors and stress. Stressors are the things that we deal with on a daily basis, right? Work, family, money, caring for people, caring for aging parents, family drama, medical problems, grief, all those things that are sort of external. And then we have internal stressors as well, things like guilt, self-esteem, self-worth, how we connect our success and our productivity with how we feel about ourselves. Those things can also be triggers for a stress response. So those are stressors, but stress itself is how the body responds. So the neurological, physiological, and mental reactions that we have to anything, from things related to the past to worries about the future. Anything that takes us out of the here and now is considered a potential activator for the stress response. Later, I'm sure we'll get into what that stress response cycle actually looks like. That's a really important framework, actually, for how to actually cope with stress, how to recognize it and then cope with it. But, as you mentioned, stress affects the mind, it affects the body, but what I see most often is, anxiety, depression, and you don't have to meet criteria for a clinical depression to experience the effects of stress on the mind. So moodiness, feeling short-tempered, tendencies to overfunction, right, overdo, and then maybe tendencies to underfunction, right? We get a sort of crash at the end of a stressful period. So sometimes people report feeling either they're really on top of things, so much so that they're spread really thin, or they are like unable to do much at all and need like a month to sleep.
Yeah.
So when we see that kind of fluctuation in ability to function, we know, stress is probably the culprit. The two things I feel like are also important to mention as far as burnout, which is really different than just everyday stress, is what people report as, it's called depersonalization, or starting to feel like indifferent, right? That quiet quitting article that went around the internet a few weeks ago, that sense of going through the motions, feeling a little cynical, apathetic. And then the other thing is emotional exhaustion, right? Which is when we really know we're stuck, right? Emotions have to be felt all the way through to sort of come out the other side. When we feel exhausted, though, emotionally, we're not able to really, kind of get those feelings out and resolved such that we're feeling pretty powerless and not able to control things that we used to feel like we at least should be able to control.
Yeah.
Right?
And I know, Michelle, we mentioned, you meditating lately for the past couple of years. What are some things that you've personally learned about stress and stress management, since we've been going through the pandemic?
Well, that it happens to everybody, right? Like we all feel it. And that it doesn't just happen to be around things that you would say are bad, right? Like it could also happen around things that you feel excited about, like a new baby or a new job. And it's something that, to me, they come in waves, right? So what I was listening to you talking about letting your emotions kind of flow through, is that the more that I can just let them kind of pass through like a wave, then they don't get stuck. They actually help me to get through it quicker. So that's really what I've kind of learned over these last couple of years. And then with the yoga and the meditation, the biggest thing that it does for me personally, it takes me out of the fight or flight mode. And if I'm in fight, flight, or freeze, then a lot of times you kind of zoom in on something and you lose your perspective, which actually I think makes the stress feel a little bit more impactful. And so that's what I really learned about it, is that if I can find ways to kind of calm my nervous system and take me out of that, it helps the stress to pass through a lot quicker.
And Curtis, same question for you. For the past couple of years, what have you learned personally about your stress and stress management?
Yeah, so a lot, really, over the last couple of years. I learned that stress comes in all shapes and sizes, different times as well. And so there was a quote that I read years ago that said, life is 20% what happens to you and 80% how you respond to it, which really stuck with me. And I still think about that, to this day when I'm, going through different things. But for me, I think over the last few years, we actually had a daughter. So my wife and our daughter was born in May 2020, and leading up to that, obviously, there's a lot of stress, a lot of worry, a lot of concern about, hey, I got to prepare for this new child that's coming in. And so leading up to that, I was able to be at those doctor's appointments, and then when the pandemic started, that stopped, and I wasn't able to be with my wife for those appointments. That had, led to concerns about whether or not I'd be able to be in the delivery room. And, there was a lot of unknown, obviously, so you have those stresses along with everything else. So fast forward, I was able to be in the delivery room. Everything went wonderful, it was great, but then we get home and we have to, make sure the baby has what they need. You couple that with the lack of sleep, you couple that with worry, but now we have to also protect the child, not just from the general basic things, but now from COVID. How do we protect her from visitors? Do we allow visitors in the home? Do we have to be more careful when we leave the home? And so a lot of those stressors were there in 2020. And so now, we've gotten a little bit better. The pandemic has changed a little bit. And so things are certainly different, but certainly learned a lot over the last few years.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that was definitely the most stressful time as a parent of an older child, having to teach and work at the same time, being confined to an apartment for days, weeks at a time. It's not like the teachers were prepared, to send the work home. They didn't know what to do either, because at first it was, well, we're just going to close school for 2 weeks. I'm like, I'm not a scientist or anything, but I don't think 2 weeks is going to be enough. Then it went to 2 months, and then it went to, okay, we'll see you next year. And that was very stressful, the unknown and answering questions from our kids, because it's not like we had been through it either. So that was very scary and stressful as well, because they depend on us to be that rock and to be full of knowledge, and I didn't have any answers either. So that's a really good point. So we can talk about parenting and stress a little bit. Dr. Blandino, what's been your experience with stress management and parents in your patients?
So specific to the pandemic or overall, I think?
Or overall, they're stressful without
everything
the pandemic.
applies, but it applied especially during the pandemic. So anything we were all struggling with collectively, I think just got really concentrated. But there were a couple of things I noticed. On the one hand, we were all scrambling, to adjust expectations, how we work, how we parent, virtual school, which was ridiculous. So there was a lot of adjustments that needed to be made pretty quickly, along with the notion of, how long is this going to last? But I think what also happened for a lot of people, including myself, was a little bit of relief. Relief in that we had no choice but to also slow down a little bit.
Yes.
Right? That we had fewer places to be. Yeah. Well, nowhere to be. We weren't sitting in traffic,
Right.
dealing with a morning commute. We didn't even have to wear pants sometimes, right? We could just hop on Zoom with our jogging pants. So there were some things that I think brought a lot of people some much needed relief. And so I think what happened for a lot of people, myself included, is that we sort of realized, maybe for the first time, just how spread thin we've been, that we have this hustle culture.
Yeah.
Right? Where we wear crazy busy like a badge of honor, right? If we're not scrambling to get a million things done, to be all the things to everybody, that human giver syndrome that a lot of women especially deal with, without so many of those demands, we're free to realize just how backed up we are on taking care of ourselves. Yeah. So that felt like a really important realization for a lot of people.
And Michelle, you being a mom of 4, what advice could you give for stress management or balance?
Have a sense of humor. It's like the first thing I say. But I think the bigger thing is thinking, like losing the shoulds, right? So a lot of times people are saying, well, I should do this and I should do that. And I like to say, well, if I really wanted to, I could, which gives me a sense of I don't have to do everything. And keeping that bigger picture of, a lot of times I ask myself, does this really matter?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't really matter, then I just tend to let it go.
Yeah.
It helps me a lot.
Yeah, I'm loving this new attitude too.
Right.
Yeah. So much more free time.
Yes, exactly.
Actually, could I say something
Yeah,
about that?
yeah, definitely.
I think that's such an important thing. Shoulds, if we could replace that word with like prefer or wish. But I think what comes up for a lot of people around the shoulds is a values conflict, right? Like we want to be, hardworking and to say yes to all the opportunities and all the things, to volunteer at school, but we also claim to value self-care. And so we have these competing values which compete for our energy and our time. I think relationship with time is the hardest part of stress management, right? You have to actually make choices about how to spend your time.
Right.
And everything we do feels important.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to, slow down and say, is this really important, or can I put this into perspective? Because for a lot of us, it's all important.
Yeah, and we definitely tend to put self-care on the back burner.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, and we tend to prioritize the things that make us feel secure and safe more than we prioritize the things that will give us relaxation or pleasure or joy.
Yeah, and speaking of which, Curtis, what are some things that you do for self-care and to relax?
I think for me is, I think one of the things that I'm hearing from both of our panelists today is the need for balance. I think balance is important. We have this flexible type of work culture nowadays, which is great, but that balance. I think kind of stepping away, from the desk or stepping away from the computer just for a moment to breathe, relax, spend some time with the family, whether it be inside the home or outside of the home, but just getting out, getting some fresh air, just changing your scenery for just a moment.
Yeah, and I went to a conference a few months ago, and they spoke about changing your mindset as well. There's a heavy focus on the word balance, and we should try to focus more on integration, because if we focus on balance and always trying to level something out, something's always going to fall short, no matter what. So try to think of it more as an integration, about working everything together versus making sure everything is leveled out. So we definitely want to transition into the body's reaction to stress. Dr. Blandino, what are some health issues that can come from a high volume of stress?
So I want to put this into context because I think we all probably have heard that stress causes health problems, but few people kind of understand really why and what that's about. So I'll just briefly give you a little lesson on the stress response cycle, if you're up for it.
We're
a
here
little bit of
for it.
science,
Yeah.
okay? So, like in the day, like 2 million years ago, really our biggest concern was being chased by lions and stuff, right? So when
Glad
we
we got out of
encounter, but
Glad we got out of that.
yeah, exactly. Although I don't know, it's kind of harder these days. But when we're confronted with an actual life threat, like being chased by a lion, our bodies do really predictable, reliable things in response, right? We're wired for it, right? Our sympathetic nervous system gets kicked in. We release all kinds of stress hormones and chemicals, cortisol, adrenaline, all the things that help us really laser in on what we need to do, which is survive, right? So we run, and the body, in order to make that happen most efficiently, necessarily has to shut down pretty much every other system in the body: immune system, digestive system, reproductive system. Blood pressure goes up, your heart races, blood rushes to your extremities. You are ready to deal with this threat by either fighting it or getting the hell out of there, right? So that's what we do. We run home to our village. Our people come out, they help us kill the lion. They've got a big feast waiting for us. Everybody's jumping up and down. We made it, we survived.
Yeah.
Everything's cool. Your stress response cycle is complete, right? That's the message that your body gets that says everything's okay now, right? So fast forward, actually, I'll just say this too. You might think that the reason that the cycle is complete is because the lion is dead, right? The threat is no longer there. The stressor is gone. But that's not actually the case, right? Say the lion gets struck by lightning while you're running home. You might turn around and say, oh, no longer a threat, lion's dead. Do you stroll home all relaxed, reflecting on how lucky you are to be alive? No, you're probably still pretty amped up, right? You get home, same thing. Your village greets you, you got the food, and everybody's celebrating, hugging. Then your body gets the message that I'm okay, right? Whenever we experience something really scary, it takes a minute, right? So it's not necessarily as easy as eliminate the stressor. You have to complete the stress response cycle in the body in order for everything to work together again. Your thoughts, your feelings, your attempt to connect with people. So fast forward to modern times, we don't really have to worry about lions anymore, but we have to worry about deadlines that we can't meet. Applying to preschools, right? Figuring out how to pay for groceries with inflation, like all the things that make up everyday life. Those are ongoing chronic lions, right? So your body is gonna require a little bit more to get the message that we're okay, right? And so getting back to your question about how this impacts health, when your body is not completing the stress response cycle, you've got cortisol and adrenaline and glucocorticoids marinating inside of you. Literally, you're stewing in stress juice. And so those chemicals and the corresponding way that your immune system is lowered, your digestive system slows down, it accumulates. And it can create all kinds of risk for problems like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, behavioral problems, impulse control issues, substance abuse problems, depression. So there's really no system of the body that is safe from the effects of stress if it is not well managed. It's a public health crisis.
Yeah. And Michelle, you had mentioned yoga as a way to kind of relieve that stress. What are some ways that people can manage stress with yoga? Are there any specific type of exercises?
Yeah, so I have found that yoga has been something that helps me to kind of process through and like complete that stress cycle. I think the first thing is just even the willingness to be okay with kind of putting down the suitcases for that moment, because it's continual and it's always going. And there are a few things that, well, so with that, like if you're at work, you kind of take on the shape of your stress, right? Like your shoulders can kind of come up to your ears, and if we're working at a desk job and we drive here, we're very linear, like we're very much looking forward, and we lose a bit of that flexibility. And I think there's this connection between flexibility in your body and flexibility in your mind. And one of the things that yoga does is that it has a very wide range of motion, right? So you're moving to the side and you're opening up your side body and you're doing some twists and you're doing a bit of a pattern break within your body that I find helps to relieve a lot of that stress. And then there are certain moves that you can do within yoga. I mean, yoga is just such a wide tent, right? So the great thing about yoga is that it can meet you where you are, depending on your level of flexibility or your physical, no matter what body shape or size that you are. But there are certain things, like I'm very much into restorative yoga, which is a lot about laying back on and being supported by a bolster or pillows, because it kind of gives you that feeling of actually being supported, which can help you to relax. There are forward folds that you can do, and especially if you rest your head on something, that's also something that's very calming. And these are motions that I do a lot of times in the evening before I get into bed. So a lot of people feel like you get in bed to relax, but if you can take some time to actually do some relaxing before you get into bed, you'll have a better quality of sleep. And that helps you even the next day to be a little bit more relaxed in your moment, right? Because like it's almost like starts with a good night's sleep. And so those are some things. And then the last thing I'm going to say is some hip openers that you can do also, like even if you just bring your leg up like this and you're kind of moving your knee out to the side. Hip openers are great because we're all very much, I mean, the way that we're all sitting is just very linear. And anything that you can do to break that pattern in your body is something that can help you move stress through.
Yeah, I'm glad that was a good point, because I think a lot of us, at the end of the day, we're like, oh, I can't wait to get in bed and relax. And then you get in bed, next thing you know, you're watching Netflix for like 2 hours and you're not asleep yet.
Yeah.
So that's great advice.
Something to kind of help move the day out is always, I find to be really beneficial before I get into bed.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely going to try that one. What is the best way for someone to get introduced to yoga? Like a class? Do they do a group class or maybe a YouTube video? Or what's the best way for them to even start?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any one right way, right? So a lot of it depends on your personality and how much time that you have. I mean, going to a studio is always great to take maybe a beginning hatha class, because you have an instructor there who can help you with modifications and props that can make it a lot more accessible. But you don't need to dedicate an hour to go to a class, right? There's a lot of online services free through YouTube. I personally use an app that I pay for.
What's the app?
It's called Yoga Glow.
Okay.
And I really like it. It has thousands of classes on there and has all different levels, a lot of different styles. And the thing is that those are great because you could spend 5 minutes. You don't need to spend an hour. I think it's a bit of a mind trick that you think, oh, if I don't do it for this much time, it's not really going to make a difference. But I think if you focus on consistency over intensity, you'll find that over time, it builds up in a way that is extremely beneficial.
Awesome. So let's transition into stress prevention versus management. Dr. Blandino, what are some ways that you prevent stress and some suggestions that you make to your patients?
So prevention is key, right? You can't, it's a lot harder to intervene when you're at a level 10, right? When you're already burnt out, right? And we all know what that feels like. You're flooded, you're overwhelmed. It's really hard to even remember to breathe, let alone to do the good quality deep breathing that I think is important. So prevention, the first, I think, real task is to develop skills around self-awareness, right? And we all, we've heard of that word introspection, right? The ability to check in with yourself. How am I doing? How am I doing in my mind and my body? Another word, and I learned this through my yoga practice, is interoception, which is the awareness of what's going on in your body, in your nervous system, right? How's my heart rate? Where are my shoulders? Where am I carrying my tension? Is it a feeling of, sinking feeling in my gut? How are those things related to the thoughts that I'm having about myself? Am I experiencing, shame or anxiety or low self-worth? And how those things are related, then you can kind of ask yourself, what am I doing in an effort to cope with that stuff? Am I looking for the pint of ice cream when I get home? Am I yelling at my kids?
Yeah.
So to be able to change something, you have to first be aware of it. You can't control or change what you're not even aware of.
Yeah.
So that practice of really slowing down and taking inventory, what's going on with me and what's going on in my environment, that helps it make sense, right? So where am I struggling? Then from there, it's about knowing what you need. And everybody needs different things. I mean, generally speaking, and it's pretty well documented in the literature that exercise is really the best thing to do. It's the thing that really does most effectively complete the stress response cycle. Like we said, when the lion's coming after you, you run. When you have a really hard day at work, you got to get it out, right? It's a visceral problem that needs visceral release. A lot of people, though, I think struggle with not knowing where to start with self-care. So I really talk to people about just taking it slow, like you were saying, Michelle, about 5 minutes. You don't need to devote an hour. Some people would say, I don't have an hour, right? So this practice of, hand on the heart, noticing what it is that you're experiencing, naming it explicitly, right? My heart's beating really fast, or I'm experiencing anxiety right now, or I'm having negative thoughts about myself. What's it about? Well, I just got an email from my boss that really felt stressful. Okay, what do I need to do in this moment? We tend to get really future focused, right? Everything gets really global and negative.
Which is easy to do.
It's very easy to do. Our minds are very complex. We're very clever at jumping years ahead. How is all this now going to affect my future? How am I going to screw up my kids? How am I going to, not end up getting that promotion that I've been wanting, right?
Yeah.
So your ability to come back to the here and now is the safest place for your body to be and for your mind to be. So that's kind of like some things to do before it's like too late.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we can talk about burnout and kind of what to do in that sense, but I think those are the things that help with prevention. Slowing down.
Yeah. And it almost sounds cliche, but really taking it one day at a time.
Literally, sometimes 1 hour at a time.
Yeah.
1 minute at a time even.
Awesome. So now we're going to hear from a few of our employees and their experience with stress in a short video. What are some warning signs for yourself that indicate that you're too under stress or overwhelmed?
I'd say I've always noticed whenever my heart rate goes up a lot, that's definitely something where that's my first indicator when I'm feeling stressed.
I tend to get kind of ornery.
Headaches, migraines, just the feeling of fatigue.
I lose interest in things that I normally have interest in, or I'm spending too much time in bed.
If I just want to snooze the alarm, it's not going to be a good day.
When you're stressed, how do you try and manage it?
So I try to exercise.
Whenever I'm at a point where I'm stressed, I try to just kind of get away from whatever is stressing me.
Dance or take a walk, or find a friend that's willing to talk to me about it.
Whether it's a specific project or if you're trying to multitask, I always go with just writing things down on a list and prioritizing from there so I can eat away at whatever it is that's stressing you out.
Do you think that people are more stressed by work or home life?
That is a good question, and I don't really think that's a simple answer because I think everybody has different stressors, and I think that's why work-life balance is important, because you could be stressed at work and then go home and have a totally different type of stress.
I think that might depend on what stage of life you're in.
Actually, both.
What are some ways that you try to relax?
Netflix.
Sleep is probably one of the best things you can do to relax.
Well, when the kids go to bed, I like to sit on the couch and enjoy my, Netflix shows.
Music. I love music. I think music is a good outlet.
I like to game a lot, lots of gaming.
I like to play with my puppy children and kitty children, and I like to cook.
Curtis, we appreciate your time. Thanks. Back to you, Curtis, on the panel.
I'm ready.
Those people look so familiar, don't they, Curtis?
Yes. Yes,
So Dr. Blandino, a few of our employees talked about, ways that they relieve stress and, different factors that go into their stress. But what are some things that can happen, or consequences rather, if stress is not handled properly?
I mean, it's a pathway to burnout, right? And burnout, again, is that where we reach emotional exhaustion. And for some people, it can be a sense of disconnection, detachment, right? You stop caring, right? You lose an energy for the work or for dealing with the problems. You sort of get really passive about coping. And for some people, it's a little bit more active, right? It's that emotional exhaustion that keeps you up at night. Maybe you're on that like hamster wheel of negative thoughts. Things get really rigid or inflexible. You feel stuck about how to problem solve. Sometimes it's important to know the difference between problems that can be solved versus realities that we just need to accept, and how we need to give ourselves grace, right? But yeah, burnout is the risk, and burnout really overlaps a lot with clinical depression, right? And anxiety. Things like grief and really extra hard things that we go through just as humans. If we don't take care of ourselves, when those almost inevitable, really hard things happen, we're out of gas in the tank. We're out of resources to cope. And so whenever you feel like your stressors are outweighing your capacity to cope, or when your internal and external resources are feeling really limited, that's when I think you're at risk, for things like, depression or medical problems. And so that's when, you need to get some help.
So if stress is normal, of course, and if everyone is experiencing stress, at what point do people feel that they should seek professional help?
I think, when you get to that state of overwhelm, Brene Brown talks about this. If you don't know who that is, look it up as soon as you leave here. Brene Brown. She talks about overwhelm being the difference between stress and overwhelm. Stress is normal, like everyday healthy experiences. It gets us going. It motivates us, right? Without stress, we wouldn't really be very, equipped to function. Yeah. Overwhelm is when you're not able to function, right? You start to really lose your ability to get anything done.
Yeah.
And so, our biological imperative, aside from finding safety, is finding connection. And so if there's one thing I want people to walk away with from this, is we need each other.
Yeah.
You can't deal with burnout or anything extreme without help, without support from other humans. Whether that's grabbing a coworker and having lunch outside, or figuring out what your company offers in terms of employee assistance or support or counseling, make it happen, right? This might surprise you, but people that come to me that are overwhelmed or stressed or burnt out, they feel better within 1 to 3 sessions. Just having someone to hear them out and validate what they're going through, and to reassure them that it's not that there's anything wrong with you, you're just a human doing really hard things.
Yeah.
And there are lots of things that you can try that I can help you sort of decide, where to start. People feel better, really fast.
Yeah, and everyone isn't, always in the space to ask for help, or, it's just not in their personality to do that. What are some ways that friends and family can be supportive of people that do not ask for help and that they need it?
Check in with people, right? Simple text, thinking about you. Saw that you were having a hard day in the meeting yesterday. Just want to let you know I'm thinking about you.
Yeah.
We get a little bit overwhelmed, I think, in our culture, not only with our own stress, but with other people's stress is contagious too, by the way. If you're around people that are really
Definitely.
stressed and amped up, that can affect your own physiology. So being able to recognize that stress in other people doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to take it on, but that you can identify yourself in it, like relate to it, and use it to connect, right? Connection is literally just as important as regulating your nervous system.
And Curtis, I know we've got open enrollment coming up. What are some resources for employees for stress and coping?
Yeah, great question. So for Coke, anyone who is familiar with the Coke Wellbeing Program, SupportLink is actually our go-to EAP provider, Employee Assistance Program. And so SupportLink has a number of tools and resources. And so the first access point for SupportLink is through Engage. You can also access SupportLink through our Coke Wellbeing website, so mylifechoices.com/wellbeing. You can go there, you can go into SupportLink. I strongly encourage everyone, if you haven't already done so, go ahead and set up an account, even if you don't need that support right away. Go ahead and set the account up. There's a number of tools you may be able to share with coworkers, employees, but then also family members. So that is a resource open to all employees and family members of their immediate household. So certainly check out SupportLink. You've got virtual support group sessions. You've got 30-minute sessions there that you can sign up for. You also, if you wanted to do self-paced type of modules and programs, you can also do that. And in all the areas that we've kind of discussed today, from stress to worry to mindfulness, sleep even. So I think certainly check SupportLink out whenever possible.
Perfect.
Do it today.
Like now.
Yeah.
And on the replay for this, there will be links available that you all can click directly on Microsoft Stream. We do have some time to take any questions that anyone from the audience might have, or our online audience as well. Oh, he's coming down with the mic for you.
The back to work effort was the fact that they mentioned the gym being open for free. But I think one of the tough things is that it's open for such a limited amount of hours during the day that it's almost like you'd have to choose to either not take lunch or push work out. Do you think that there's the opportunity potentially, as we're talking about physical activity being like a good outlet for stress, that the gym could be open for maybe more hours?
That'd probably be more of a well-being question. Of course, that's going to be up to staffing as well, I'm sure, for the actual physical location. But if your time is limited, based on the time for the gym, I probably would also suggest that even walking for lunch, just making sure you're stepping away from your desk to go and do that. That is a small way that you can contribute to some physical activity during the day. Any other questions?
Are there any breathing exercises that you could recommend that would help in the time of extreme stress?
Absolutely. I think we could probably both say a little bit about that. You want to go first?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ones. I know one of the ones that I really think about is fully exhaling. And fully exhaling out of your mouth is always a good thing. So even, to be honest, before I came here today, I was feeling a little nervous. And so I really, so one of the things when you're feeling stressed, you notice that you probably breathe more shallow and you may actually hold your breath. So a lot of times what I do is I actually think about pushing my belly all the way in to get out all of the breath. And then I'm able to take in a nice deeper breath at that point is one thing. And then the other thing that's really good is something called box breathing. So box breathing is something really simple, and it's something you could do while you're sitting here, and it's to the count of 5. So you inhale slowly for the count of 5, and then you hold your breath for the count of 5, and then you exhale for the count of 5, and then you hold your breath out for a count of 5. And so I think that it does a couple things. One is that you're counting, so you're not thinking about like all the other things that you have going on in your world in that moment. So it really helps you to bring yourself into the present moment. And then also you're getting full cycles of breath, like you're definitely inhaling fully, and then you're holding your breath, and then you're exhaling fully. And I find that the exhaling fully and keeping it out is something that we don't typically do on a day-to-day basis, right? Like we're constantly in, out, in, out, in, out. So mindfully holding your breath out just for those 5 seconds, I find that it kind of re-shifts me back into this moment. It keeps me more present. I think that my brain is like, oh my gosh, I'm not breathing. And then it snaps me right into the present moment. And I do that routinely. It helps me a lot during the day, and it's something you could do at your desk, you know, maybe a couple rounds of it, and then when you finish, just breathe naturally and just notice, but I think it might help you feel a little bit better. Yep.
The other thing, that's exactly what I was going to say. I call it square breathing, and there's so many different breathing techniques, but one of the other things that I encourage people to do is you can sit and tense muscle groups one at a time. Hold tension, you know, maybe in your shoulders or clench your fists, and notice what that experience of tension feels like, and hold it, you know, for like 10 seconds and then let it go. And that helps your body, that helps with that interoception skill to be able to notice the difference between what it feels like to be tense on purpose and then the contrast of what it feels like to actually feel relaxed. And you can do that from head to toe. Starting with your feet, or starting with your head, whichever. It's called progressive muscle relaxation. There's probably a ton of YouTube videos that you can look up, but that's something that I do too, because sometimes I don't even realize that I'm holding a lot of tension until I actually intentionally make it worse.
Yeah.
Right? And then experience letting it go.
Yeah. It's like a feeling of relief.
Yes.
It's like when you feel that relief, it is so satisfying.
Yeah.
And you're creating that feeling for yourself, which feels really good.
And physiologically, you're actually tricking your body into completing the stress response cycle. Because the breathing and the relaxation piece, especially the exhale, like you said, is what activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of fight or flight. So I always like to know the science because it makes it seem more valid. You know you're doing something good for your body because, we have the data. We know it.
Yeah. Awesome. I think we have time for one more if there are any additional questions. Nope. Going once, going twice. All right, awesome. Well, we definitely want to thank our panelists for joining us today. Definitely want to thank our audience, both in person and live. I do want to leave you with, GP puts safety at the forefront. This is just as important, your mental health. If you think about it, you're putting on your safety vest or your safety hat. What are you protecting exactly? You're protecting your brain, right? Because it's important. So I think that if we think about mental health in that aspect, that we can definitely continue to put safety first in all aspects, including our mental health, and continue to give each other grace, especially for ourselves. You never know what other people are going through, and there's a lot of people that aren't willing to talk about it. But if you are considering talking to someone, hopefully today is your sign to do that. So thank you so much.